Officers Williams and Rodriguez arrived within minutes, their patrol car rolling silently into the cul-de-sac with lights flashing but no siren. Officer Williams, a 15-year veteran with salt and pepper hair, radioed their arrival to dispatch while Officer Rodriguez, younger and only 3 years on the force, surveyed the scene. They spotted Marcus immediately, still on the ladder, focused on adjusting the antenna. "Approach with caution," Williams murmured. "Remember, no assumptions." As they stepped out of the vehicle, Marcus noticed the reflection of police lights against his neighbor's vinyl siding. He turned and froze momentarily at the sight of 2 uniformed officers approaching, their hands resting near their holsters. His stomach tightened, a familiar knot of anxiety he'd felt during previous encounters with law enforcement, including once being pulled over for matching a description and another time being questioned for simply waiting for a friend outside a coffee shop. Marcus carefully stepped down from his ladder, muscle memory taking over as he raised his hands slightly, keeping them visible at chest level. "Good afternoon, sir," Officer Williams called out, maintaining a professional distance. "We received a call about suspicious activity at this address. Mind telling us what you're doing here?" Marcus took a deep breath, keeping his voice measured despite his racing pulse. "This is my house, officers. I just moved in yesterday and today. I'm trying to fix the Wi-Fi signal. The antenna needs adjusting." He gestured slowly toward the router attachment near the roofline. Officer Rodriguez studied Marcus's face, then glanced at the tools scattered on the ground: a screwdriver, some electrical tape, and a signal meter. Nothing that resembled burglary equipment. Across the street, Patricia emerged from her front door and stood on her wide colonial porch, arms crossed tightly over her cardigan. A couple of other neighbors had also taken notice, with an elderly man 2 doors down pausing his gardening to observe the scene, and a young mother slowing her evening stroll with her toddler to watch from a distance. "Do you have any identification that shows you live here?" Officer Rodriguez asked, his tone neutral but his posture still alert. "My wallet's inside," Marcus replied, gesturing toward the front door where moving boxes were visible through the window. "I can get it for you." Patricia descended her porch steps and began crossing the street, her chin raised with the determination of someone who believed themselves to be performing a civic duty. "Officers," she called out before she'd even reached them, "I'm the one who called. I've never seen this man before. And the Davidsons who owned this house were." She paused, looking directly at Marcus. They were different. Officer Williams held up a hand toward Patricia, signaling her to stop several feet away from the scene. "Ma'am, please give us a moment to do our job," he said firmly before turning back to Marcus. "Sir, I'll need to see that ID. Officer Rodriguez will accompany you inside." Marcus nodded, keenly aware of Patricia's eyes boring into him. He unlocked the front door, pushing it open to reveal a half-furnished living room with moving boxes labeled in neat handwriting. "Kitchen, office supplies, books." Rodriguez followed him in, scanning the space with professional interest. The wall opposite the entrance immediately caught Rodriguez's attention. Unlike the rest of the still-settling house, this wall was fully decorated with carefully arranged frames. Family photos showcased Marcus's life journey. Marcus in a cap and gown, flanked by beaming parents at his MIT graduation. Marcus accepting an innovation award, shaking hands with the CEO whose face had been on magazine covers. Marcus and a beautiful woman with natural hair on a beach at sunset, her hand displaying an engagement ring. Marcus retrieved his wallet from the kitchen counter and handed his driver's license to Rodriguez. The address matched. He then reached for a folder in his backpack. "Here are my closing documents from Tuesday. I can show you the emails with my realtor too, if you need." Rodriguez studied the paperwork, his expression softening. "You're in tech?" he asked, nodding toward a box labeled coding books. "Senior developer," Marcus replied. "I relocated for a position at Frontier Tech. I start remote work tomorrow, which is why I'm trying to get this Wi-Fi fixed tonight." Marcus Johnson, a 34-year-old software engineer, had just moved into his new home in the Oak Ridge subdivision, a quiet suburban neighborhood with manicured lawns and 2-story houses spaced evenly apart. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across his driveway as he carried the last of his electronics from his car into the house. After 3 exhausting days of moving boxes and arranging furniture, Marcus was finally ready to set up his home office, the space where he would be working remotely 3 days a week for his new position at Frontier Tech Solutions. His first video meeting was scheduled for tomorrow morning, making a reliable internet connection absolutely essential. For the past hour, Marcus had been troubleshooting his spotty Wi-Fi signal, which seemed to drop every few minutes. After running diagnostics on his laptop, he determined the router's placement was the issue. The previous owners had installed an external antenna near the roofline, but it needed adjustment. Marcus dragged his aluminum stepladder from the garage and positioned it carefully against the side of the house. Dressed in a faded MIT shirt and cargo shorts, with a tool belt around his waist, he climbed up and began tinkering with the antenna's direction. His phone was tucked in his back pocket, connected to the router as he tested different positions, watching the signal strength fluctuate with each adjustment. Across the street, Patricia Winters stood at her bay window, a cup of chamomile tea cooling in her hands, as she observed the unfamiliar man working on the Davidsons' old house. At 58, Patricia had appointed herself as the unofficial guardian of Oak Ridge's security. Her position as the neighborhood association's secretary gave her access to all community notices, and she was certain no one had informed her about new residents moving in. She squinted, noting the man's dark skin and the tools around his waist. The Davidsons, who had moved to Florida last month, were white. This man definitely wasn't related to them. Patricia watched him fiddle with something near the roof, a suspicion growing by the second. He's probably disabling the security system, she muttered to herself. Without hesitation or attempting to speak with him, Patricia set down her tea, grabbed her phone from the counter, and dialed 911. Her voice took on an urgent quality as she reported a suspicious man who appears to be breaking into the house at 347 Maple Lane, emphasizing that he was a large black man who definitely doesn't belong in this neighborhood and is tampering with something on the side of the house. Outside, Officer Williams was keeping Patricia at a professional distance, but she remained undeterred. The Davidsons never mentioned setting to, she trailed off, gesturing vaguely toward the house. To a black man? Williams asked directly, his voice low but firm. Patricia flushed. I'm just saying it's suspicious. We have procedures in the HOA for new residents. Rodriguez emerged from the house, giving Williams a subtle nod. Everything checks out, he said. Mr. Johnson here is indeed the new homeowner, closed on the property Tuesday. The small crowd of neighbors that had gathered watched as Patricia's certainty visibly faltered. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed again without words. Williams turned to Marcus. I apologize for the disturbance, Mr. Johnson. Welcome to the neighborhood. The officer's tone carried the weight of genuine regret for the unnecessary confrontation. Marcus stood in his doorway, relief washing over him, but mixed with a familiar weariness. This wasn't his first such encounter, and despite the resolution, the humiliation of having to prove his right to exist in his own home lingered in the pit of his stomach. He noticed some neighbors whispering, others looking embarrassed, while a few seemed to be pointedly avoiding Patricia's gaze. After confirming Marcus's identity, Officers Williams and Rodriguez walked Patricia back across the street. Though their conversation was conducted in low tones, neighbors noticed Williams's stern expression and Patricia's defensive posture gradually deflating. The officers spent nearly 15 minutes explaining the serious implications of racial profiling and misusing emergency resources. Before leaving, Officer Williams handed his card to Marcus. If you have any further issues, please don't hesitate to call me directly. That evening, Marcus's story ricocheted through the Oak Ridge Community Facebook group. Beth Sullivan, the neighborhood association president and local high school principal, posted a careful but pointed message about welcoming all new neighbors with respect and dignity. Comments accumulated rapidly, many expressing embarrassment, others defending neighborhood vigilance, and a passionate debate unfolding about what belonging truly meant in Oak Ridge. 3 days later, Marcus was deep in a coding session when his doorbell rang. Opening the door, he found himself facing 7 neighbors clustered on his porch. Beth Sullivan stood at the front, her silver streaked hair pulled back in a professional bun, holding a wicker basket overflowing with local specialty foods. Beside her stood Jim Cavanaugh, the elderly gardener who had witnessed the confrontation, clutching an envelope. And at the edge of the group, looking as if she'd rather be anywhere else, stood Patricia. "We wanted to properly welcome you to Oak Ridge," Beth said warmly, "and to apologize for how that welcome began." Jim stepped forward, extending the envelope. "This is an invitation to our monthly neighborhood barbecue this Saturday. We'd be honored if you'd come." His weathered face crinkled with a genuine smile. "And some of us," he turned slightly toward Patricia, "wanted to apologize for jumping to conclusions." Patricia took a reluctant half-step forward, her gaze fixed somewhere around Marcus's shoulder. "I should have introduced myself before calling anyone," she said stiffly. The words clearly cost her, but they were a beginning. The incident became a catalyst for change within Oak Ridge. Beth organized a series of community conversations titled Knowing Our Neighbors, held in the subdivision's clubhouse. Attendance grew with each session. 3 months later, when a position opened on the Neighborhood Safety Committee, Marcus surprised everyone, including himself, by volunteering. At their first committee meeting, Patricia initially sat as far from Marcus as possible. But when he proposed a system for welcoming new residents that combined her knowledge of community procedures with his tech expertise, a fragile bridge began to form. Their initially awkward collaboration gradually evolved into a genuine, if complicated, respect. 6 months after the incident, a reporter from the local newspaper interviewed them both for a feature titled Building Community Through Confronting Bias. The photograph accompanying the article showed Marcus and Patricia standing side by side at the neighborhood entrance, neither quite comfortable, but both committed to a different future than their first encounter had promised.